At 42, I believed I had life perfectly mapped out. A stable career, a comfortable home, and a wife I adored. But as I sit in this diner, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and my own crushing regret, I understand now that my entire world was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Just a few hours ago, it was meant to be another typical Friday night. Sarah, my wife of 12 years, mentioned a work dinner she couldn't miss. I didn't press for details. I always valued her independence. Yet, tonight, something felt different. She was dressed exquisitely. A sleek black dress that accentuated her figure, heels higher than she'd worn in ages, and a perfume that clung to the air long after the front door clicked shut. Call it intuition, or perhaps a creeping paranoia, but an unsettling certainty settled in my gut. Something was profoundly wrong. For months, subtle clues had been accumulating. Late-night texts she attributed to colleagues, business trips that seemed suspiciously elaborate given recent company budget cuts, and a growing coolness in her tone, as if every conversation with me was an unwelcome chore. Tonight, I decided I could no longer feign ignorance. After Sarah departed, I remained in the quiet living room, my gaze fixed on the empty wine glass she'd left behind. A decision solidified. I grabbed my jacket, got into the car, and headed for the restaurant I knew she would be attending. It wasn't difficult to ascertain. A few days prior, she'd carelessly left her laptop open, and the dinner was clearly marked on her digital calendar. I parked several blocks away, ensuring I wouldn't be seen, my heart hammering against my ribs as I approached the entrance. It was one of those exclusive establishments, dim lighting, tables artfully separated for maximum privacy, and a menu priced to induce a headache. I spotted her instantly. She wasn't alone. There she sat, across from a man I'd never seen before. He appeared younger, perhaps early 30s, with slicked back hair and a smug smirk that ignited a cold fury within me. They laughed, leaning in conspiratorially, her hand resting on his arm as if it had always belonged there. In that moment, the ground beneath me seemed to vanish. I didn't storm in. Instead, I paced the sidewalk outside, grappling with the tempest raging within me. Rage, heartbreak, utter humiliation. I yearned to burst through those doors and unleash a torrent of screams, at her, at him, at the entire world. But then, a colder, more calculated idea took root. I returned to my car, removed my wedding ring, and held the small gold band in my palm. It suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I walked back into the restaurant, feigning an air of belonging, and flagged down a waiter. "Excuse me," I said, sliding the ring into his hand. "Could you do me a favor? Take this to the woman at that table, over there." The waiter, though confused, nodded. I retreated to a discreet spot near the bar, where I could observe unnoticed. The waiter approached their table, and I watched as Sarah's smile wavered when he presented her with the ring. She looked at it, then up at him, clearly bewildered. The instant her eyes swept across the room, searching frantically for me, is etched forever in my memory. The color drained from her face as she clutched the ring, her lover staring at her with a raised eyebrow, oblivious to the unfolding drama. I didn't linger to see the conclusion. I simply walked out, got into my car, and drove. Now, I sit here, lost, trying to comprehend what comes next. What do you even say to someone after that? As I sat in the diner, gazing at my untouched coffee, my phone buzzed on the table. Sarah's name flashed across the screen. I didn't answer. Not yet. I needed her to stew in the wreckage she'd created. My hands trembled, the urge to shout into the phone almost overwhelming. The vibration ceased, only to resume moments later. This time, a text. "David, where are you? I just want to talk. Please." I let out a bitter, hollow chuckle in the empty booth. Talk. Now. After she'd been laughing and intimately leaning into another man as if I ceased to exist. The waitress refilled my coffee, offering a sympathetic smile, clearly sensing my distress. I merely nodded, muttering a quick thanks. I needed space to think, but the barrage of messages continued. "I can explain. Please, let's talk. Don't do anything rash." That last one ignited my blood. Don't do anything rash? She was the one who had casually discarded 12 years of marriage, and now she worried about my reaction? Finally, I couldn't endure it any longer. I picked up the phone and hit call. She answered on the first ring. "David, please, save it." I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to spin this into something it's not. I saw you, Sarah. I saw you with him. Silence hung on the other end. For a fleeting moment, I thought she'd hung up. Then, a sigh, and her voice emerged, small and almost pathetic. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Oh, really? And how exactly were you planning for me to find out? Or were you just going to keep sneaking around until you grew bored of me entirely? It's not like that, she protested, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. You've been so distant lately, David. I didn't know how to reach you anymore. There it was, the classic blame shift. My fault. I wasn't enough. Don't you dare. I growled, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I gave you everything, Sarah. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for some guy with a cheap haircut and a smirk. She didn't respond immediately. I could hear her shallow breathing, practically visualizing her, sitting there, scrambling for an excuse that would somehow cast her as the victim in this whole sordid mess. David, she finally said, her tone pleading. Can we just meet somewhere and talk? Please. I don't want to do this over the phone. I closed my eyes and took a deep, shaky breath. The rational part of me knew that a face-to-face conversation would change nothing. But the emotional part, the part that still remembered the woman I'd married, the woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade, demanded answers. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. Tomorrow, noon, at the park where we had our first date. Thank you, she said softly. I'll be there. I hung up without another word, tossing my phone onto the table. My coffee was cold, but I didn't notice. My mind raced, 1,000 unanswerable questions swirling. Yet, deep down, I already knew the truth. This was beyond repair. The next day, I arrived at the park early. The air was crisp, carrying the subtle hint of encroaching winter. This park had always been our place, a small, quiet sanctuary, far removed from the city's ceaseless clamor. It was where I'd knelt by the old oak tree and proposed to Sarah, where we'd spent countless hours laughing and weaving dreams of our future. Now, it felt like a silent battleground. I settled onto a weathered bench near the fountain, my hands buried deep in my jacket pockets, my mind tormented by replays of the previous night. The image of Sarah, so comfortable with her lover, was seared into my brain. It felt surreal, a nightmare from which I couldn't awaken. Precisely at noon, I saw her approaching. She wore a long coat, a scarf neatly tied around her neck, and sunglasses that obscured most of her face. For a fleeting second, I wondered if she was attempting to disguise herself. She sat down on the bench, leaving a distinct, deliberate gap between us. Neither of us spoke immediately. I stared straight ahead, watching a distant couple walk their dog, while she nervously fidgeted with the strap of her purse. Finally, I broke the silence. You said you wanted to talk. So, she sighed, slowly removing her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were puffy and red. I might have felt a pang of pity had I not been consumed by such consuming fury. David, she began, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. I scoffed. You didn't want to hurt me, Sarah. You've been sneaking around with another man. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? I trusted you. I thought we had something real. She flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't plan for it. Oh, so you just tripped and fell into another man's bed? I shot back, my tone thick with sarcasm. That makes it so much better. Tears welled in her eyes, but I refused to let her guilt manipulate me. I needed answers, real answers. Who is he? I demanded. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the ground. His name is Mark. We met a few months ago at work. Of course, I muttered. The classic office affair. How original. It wasn't like that, she insisted. At first, it was just harmless. We were working late, talking about our lives, and I don't know, David, it just happened. It just happened. I repeated, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? You didn't accidentally order the wrong coffee at Starbucks, Sarah. You made a choice. You chose to betray me. She looked away, her hands trembling. I felt invisible, David. You're always so busy with work, and when you're home, you're so checked out. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. There it was, the justification. My fault again. You think that justifies what you did? I asked, my voice cold. If you were unhappy, you could have told me. You could have asked for counseling. Hell, You could have just been honest. But instead, you went behind my back and lied to me every single day. I didn't want to lose you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. You didn't want to lose me, Sarah. You lost me the second you decided he was worth more than your vows. She finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I still love you, David. I do. Her words felt like poison. How could she claim to love me after everything she'd done? You don't get to say that, I said, standing up. You don't get to sit here and pretend like this was some small mistake. You destroyed us, Sarah. You destroyed me. She reached out, but I stepped back, her hand freezing in midair. I need time to think, I said, my voice trembling with raw emotion. Don't call me. Don't text me. Just leave me alone. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked away, my chest tight, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts as I put as much distance between us as possible. As I reached the car, I glanced back. Sarah was still on the bench, her head buried in her hands. For a moment, a pang of guilt twisted within me. But then, I remembered her laughter with him, the way she had looked at him as if he were her entire world. I got in the car, slammed the door, and drove off. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was going to do next. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was irrevocably gone. The drive home passed in a haze. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my mind replaying every word Sarah had uttered in the park. Her excuses, her pathetic attempts at justification, her tears, they all felt hollow, like a flimsy bandage attempting to cover a gaping wound. When I finally reached the house, it was eerily quiet. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and the emptiness inside struck me harder than I'd anticipated. This place, our home, suddenly felt alien. I wandered into the living room, my gaze falling on the photos adorning the wall. Pictures of us smiling, looking happy, a facade that now felt like a cruel joke. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. Not just from anger or sadness, but from sheer, overwhelming frustration. How had it come to this? Was I truly so blind? After what felt like an eternity, I wiped my face and forced myself to focus. Wallowing wouldn't solve anything. I needed to understand the true extent of this betrayal. How many lies had she spun? How long had this deception been ongoing? That's when the idea struck me, a private investigator. I grabbed my laptop and began researching local PIs. It didn't take long to find someone with stellar reviews, a man named Michael. His website was clean and professional, boasting a tagline, "The truth is out there. Let me help you find it." That was precisely what I needed. I dialed the number listed, and within minutes, I was speaking with Michael. His voice was calm and direct, a no-nonsense tone that immediately put me at ease. "David, I've been doing this for over 20 years, he stated. "I've seen it all. Cheaters, liars, people hiding money. Whatever you're dealing with, I'll get to the bottom of it." I recounted everything about Sarah, her supposed work dinners, the man I'd seen her with at the restaurant. Michael listened intently, asking pointed questions. By the end of the call, we had a plan. He would begin tailing Sarah, gathering evidence, and uncovering the truth I so desperately craved. "You're doing the right thing," he said before we hung up. "Sometimes, the hardest part is facing it head-on. But knowing the truth is always better than living in the dark." That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, leaning in close. My stomach churned with a turbulent mix of anger and dread. I had no idea what Michael would uncover, but I was prepared for anything, or so I believed. The next morning, I moved through my day in a fog. Work was a blur of meaningless meetings. I barely registered anything my colleagues said. They likely noticed my detached demeanor, but no one commented. By the time I returned home, I was utterly exhausted, both mentally and physically. As I sat on the couch, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. "Got something for you. Meet me at my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. My heart hammered. What had he found? I tried to brace myself, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The next day, I arrived at Michael's office, a small but impeccably tidy space in a nondescript downtown building. He greeted me with a firm handshake and gestured for me to sit. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "This is what I've got so far." I opened the folder, and my stomach plummeted. Inside were photographs, Sarah and Mark, her so-called co-worker, together in various locations, a hotel lobby, a park bench, his car parked in our driveway while I was at work. But it was the final photo that struck me like a freight train. It had been taken at a jewelry store. Sarah and Mark stood at the counter, smiling, as she tried on a necklace. The timestamp on the photo, our wedding anniversary. She spent our anniversary with him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Michael nodded grimly. I'm sorry, David. There's more. He handed me a USB drive. There's audio too. I got a recording from the hotel lobby. It's explicit. I won't play it here unless you want me to, but you should listen when you're ready. I stared at the USB drive in my hand, its weight almost unbearable. Every shred of evidence in that folder, and on that drive, confirmed what I already knew. Sarah didn't just cheat. She completely disregarded me, our marriage, and the life we had built together. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice shaky. Michael gave me a sympathetic look. I'll keep digging if you want, but it's up to you how far you want to go. Sometimes knowing too much can make it harder to move on. I nodded, standing up. I'll think about it. As I left his office, clutching the folder and USB drive, one thing became crystal clear. I couldn't let Sarah get away with this. She needed to understand the full weight of what she'd done, not just to me, but to us. But I wouldn't confront her yet. Not until I had a plan. Driving home from Michael's office, the folder and USB drive sat ominously on the passenger seat. Every red light offered a fleeting moment to glance at it, as if it were staring back, daring me to open it again. I wanted to hurl it out the window, set it ablaze, erase it from existence. But I couldn't. I had to face this head-on, no matter how excruciating. When I arrived home, the house remained empty. Sarah hadn't returned since our conversation in the park, which was probably for the best. I needed the solitude to process. I placed the folder and USB drive on the kitchen table and poured myself a stiff drink. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it did little to numb the stinging pain of betrayal. I sat there for hours, staring at that USB drive, debating whether to listen. Michael had warned that knowing too much could impede moving on, but a part of me needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly how far she'd gone. Finally, I plugged it into my laptop and hit play. The audio was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. Sarah's laugh, light and flirty, sent a chill down my spine. Then, Mark's voice, smooth and confident, as if he hadn't a care in the world. I can't believe we pulled this off, Mark chuckled. I told you, David's clueless, Sarah replied, her tone dripping with disdain. He'd never suspect a thing. He's too busy with his boring little life to notice what's right in front of him. My heart felt like it had been violently ripped from my chest. Hearing her speak of me like that, as if I were some pathetic fool, was worse than anything I could have imagined. The conversation continued, growing more graphic as they discussed plans for a weekend getaway. My fists clenched, and I slammed the laptop shut before I could hear more. It was too much. But that was the moment I knew. I couldn't let her walk away from this without consequences. She thought she could humiliate me, disrespect me, and then simply move on with her life as if nothing had happened? Not a chance. I needed a plan, something calculated, something that would show her precisely what she had thrown away. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I didn't call her, didn't text her, didn't do anything to suggest I knew the full extent of her betrayal. When she finally reached out, her messages were calm and apologetic, as if she believed we were slowly mending things. But behind the scenes, I was meticulously at work. I gathered everything Michael had given me, the photos, the audio, every damning piece of evidence, and began constructing my case. I contacted a divorce lawyer, a sharp and relentless woman named Emily, who wasted no time outlining my options. David, you've got a solid case for infidelity, she stated during our first meeting. But if you really want to make an impact, we need to play this strategically. Do you want to confront her now, or do you want to wait until the legal process is in motion? I want her to feel it, I said, my voice firm. I want her to understand exactly what she's done, but I don't want to tip her off too soon. Emily nodded. Then we'll move quickly. Start separating your finances, freeze any joint accounts, and make sure you have access to all your important documents. Over the next week, I did exactly that. I redirected my paycheck to a separate account, secured my credit cards, and collected every piece of paperwork pertaining to our house, cars, and other assets. Sarah remained blissfully unaware. Meanwhile, I meticulously set the stage for my confrontation. On Saturday evening, I made a reservation at the very same restaurant where I'd caught her with Mark, specifically requesting the exact table they'd occupied, a small, secluded spot in the corner. The symbolism was not lost on me. I texted Sarah, "Let's have dinner tonight. I want to talk about us." She responded almost immediately, "Of course, I'll meet you there." When I arrived, she was already seated, impeccably dressed as always. Her smile was hesitant, as if she was unsure of our footing. "David," she said softly as I sat down, "I'm so glad you wanted to talk. I've been thinking about us nonstop." I forced a small smile and nodded. "Me too." The waiter approached, and we ordered drinks. The tension in the air was palpable, yet Sarah seemed eager to smooth things over. "I know I've made mistakes," she began, reaching across the table for my hand. "But I love you, and I want to fix this. I really do." Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. I simply nodded, allowing her to believe she was in control. "I'm glad to hear that," I said calmly, "because I've been doing a lot of thinking too. And there's something I need to share with you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope, the one containing the photos from Michael. I slid it across the table. Sarah's smile faltered. "What's this?" "Go ahead," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Take a look." She opened the envelope, her hands trembling as she pulled out the photos. Her face turned ashen as she flipped through them, her eyes widening with each image. "David, don't," I interrupted, my voice low but firm. "Don't insult me by pretending you didn't know this was coming." She closed the envelope, her hands shaking, and placed it back on the table. "I can explain." "No, Sarah," I said, leaning forward. "You can't. And you don't need to, because I've heard it all already. The photos, the audio, I have everything." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words emerged. "This dinner isn't about fixing things," I continued. "It's about letting you know that I'm done. You've humiliated me, disrespected me, and destroyed the life we built together. And now, it's my turn to show you what that feels like." I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table for the drinks. "Enjoy your evening, Sarah. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." And with that, I walked out, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. The moment I stepped out of the restaurant, the cool evening air brushed my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. Not peace, not closure, but the faint, undeniable hint of having taken the first step toward reclaiming control of my life. I didn't look back. I didn't care if Sarah was still sitting there, poring over the damning evidence, or if she had stormed out after me. I drove home in silence, my mind buzzing. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least now she couldn't hide. The next step was hammering the final nails into the coffin of this sham of a marriage. The following morning, I woke to a flood of missed calls and messages from Sarah. I didn't even bother opening them. I'd given her every chance in the world to come clean, to show some shred of decency, and she had squandered them all. Instead, I called Emily, my lawyer, to inform her I was ready to proceed. "Good," she said. "I'll file the papers first thing tomorrow. Given the evidence you have, this will work heavily in your favor." "What about the house?" I asked. "I don't want her to have any part of it. If we can prove she used marital funds for her affair, which, judging by the photos of her and her lover at that jewelry store on your anniversary, she did, you've got a strong case to retain full ownership." Her words offered a sense of reassurance, yet I knew a storm was still brewing. Sarah wasn't the type to let things go quietly. I anticipated a fierce battle to save face. By the end of the day, her calls finally ceased. I assumed she was regrouping, strategizing her next move. But that night, as I sat in the living room, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she stood on the porch, her eyes red-rimmed, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "David, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I need to talk to you." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I think you said enough last night." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. I was stupid, selfish, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. Just give me a chance." Her words might have sounded sincere, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. "You want a chance now?" I asked, my voice cold. "After months of sneaking around, after lying to my face, after humiliating me? You don't get to waltz back in here and pretend like you care. I do care, she insisted, stepping closer. David, I was lost. I felt like we were drifting apart, and Mark. He was just a distraction. He doesn't mean anything to me. You're the one I want. I let out a bitter laugh. You really expect me to believe that after everything I've seen, everything I've heard? Don't insult me, Sarah. She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. Please, she whispered, let me stay tonight. Just let me explain. I stared at her for a long moment, the crushing weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. Then, I stepped aside. You can come in, I said, my voice flat. But don't think for a second that this changes anything. She sat on the couch, clutching a tissue, attempting to weave together some version of the truth that might elicit my pity. It started out innocent, she began. We were working late, and we just connected. I didn't mean for it to turn into anything. I didn't think it would go this far. Stop, I said, cutting her off. I don't want to hear excuses. What I want to know is why. Why wasn't I enough for you? Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and for a moment, I thought she might actually be honest. But then she uttered the words that sealed her fate. It wasn't about you, she said softly. It was about me. I felt invisible. Mark made me feel alive again, like I mattered. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. So your solution to feeling invisible was to destroy the one person who's been by your side for 12 years? To throw away everything we built together for some guy who stroked your ego? She didn't answer, just looked down at her hands. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. The papers will be ready in a few days. I suggest you start packing your things. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. David, no. Please don't do this. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. There is no us anymore, I said, standing up. You killed that the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. She broke down, sobbing, but I didn't stay to watch. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and locked it behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my life again. The following morning, Sarah was still in the house. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and blotchy from crying all night. She looked up as I entered, a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes, but I didn't let her speak. You're still here, I said bluntly. David, please, she began, standing up. Just give me one more chance. Let me prove I can fix this. I ignored her plea and grabbed a cup of coffee. I've already made my decision, Sarah. I'm not interested in fixing something you broke beyond repair. Her face crumpled, but I didn't flinch. I had spent too long being the passive, forgiving husband. This time, I was standing my ground. By the end of the week, I want you out of the house, I continued. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be served divorce papers soon. She looked like she wanted to argue, but all she could do was nod, tears rolling down her cheeks. Later that day, I met with Emily again. She reviewed the documents I'd gathered and confirmed that Sarah's infidelity would significantly strengthen my case. File the papers, I told her. I want this over with as soon as possible. She nodded. I'll make it happen. Stay strong, David. You're doing the right thing. As I walked out of Emily's office, I felt a monumental weight lift from my shoulders. The end was truly in sight, and I was ready to move forward without Sarah dragging me down any further. That evening, I began packing up her belongings. I didn't wait for her to do it herself. Every piece of clothing, every trinket, every reminder of the life we'd shared went into boxes. When Sarah came home and saw what I'd done, she froze in the doorway. You're packing my things. Just making it easier for you to leave, I said coldly. I've already given you more time than you deserve. She didn't fight me. Instead, she sat on the couch, staring at the boxes as if she finally grasped the gravity of the situation. For once, she was silent. By the end of the week, the house was quiet, almost lifeless. Sarah's belongings were packed and waiting by the door. She had rented a small apartment on the other side of town and arranged for movers to pick up her things. For 12 years, this house had been ours, but now, for the first time, it felt unequivocally mine. On Friday morning, she stood in the foyer, gazing at the packed boxes. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting for her to leave. David, she said softly, turning to face me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll see that I never stopped loving you. I let out a bitter laugh. If this is your version of love, I want no part of it. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded. picked up her purse, and walked out the door without another word. The sound of it closing behind her felt like a definitive full stop at the end of a sentence I'd been rewriting in my head for months. That evening, I sat in the living room with a drink in hand, staring at the now empty corner where her favorite chair used to be. The silence was deafening, yet it wasn't the oppressive kind. It was the kind that heralds the beginning of something new. I thought about the years we had spent together, the good memories, and the insidious lies that had unraveled them. It hurt, but for the first time, I realized that letting her go wasn't just about punishment. It was about freedom, freedom to rebuild my life, to discover who I was without her shadow perpetually hanging over me. A few weeks later, the divorce papers were finalized. Sarah didn't contest anything. I retained the house, my savings, and my dignity. Michael's evidence had ensured that. The last I heard, she was still seeing Mark, though it wasn't exactly the fairy tale romance she had imagined. Apparently, his charm quickly faded once the thrill of sneaking around wore off. As for me, I've been taking things one day at a time. I joined a gym, started reconnecting with old friends, and even signed up for a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. I won't pretend it's easy. There are still moments when the memories creep in and the pain feels fresh again. But each day, it gets a little better. Sarah thought she could break me, but all she truly did was teach me how strong I really am. And for that, in some twisted way, I'll always be grateful.